I want to talk about anti-fragile ethics. The ethics that emerges from the picture that Taleb has been giving us in Antifragile, but also in his later book, Skin in the Game. Skin in the Game is the only true mitigator of fragility. Taleb identifies what he thinks is the deepest problem of modernity. It is the increasing tendency of people to transfer fragility to others, to become anti-fragile at the expense of others, by basically keeping all the upside of risks for themselves and transferring the downside to someone else. They take out a loan, for example, but manage to set it up in such a way that if things go bad, they don't end up suffering. Somebody else ends up paying the cost. Somebody else bails them out. You could think of an irresponsible child of a wealthy person, for example, who is spoiled and allowed to go out there and take all sorts of risks with mommy and daddy picking up the downside if things go wrong. Well, the problem with our current society is that more and more people put themselves in the position of that spoiled child. Often they are the ones who are something like the wealthy parents with the means to do it, and they set up the system in such a way that they can only gain. The risk is entirely transferred to other people. We should be outraged about that. It's not only immensely unfair to others who don't at all agree to this arrangement, and in fact generally aren't aware of it. What it means is that people are increasingly in control of our lives who have no skin in the game. That is to say, have nothing at risk themselves, nothing at stake. The rules and the downsides really don't apply to them. So they can make all sorts of decisions for the rest of us, and they impose costs on us with no corresponding cost on them. In fact, they benefit, we bear the cost. And that's something that seems fundamentally unfair. It is the central ethical problem of modernity, according to Taleb, and it's something that becomes increasingly pervasive as our societies become more bureaucratic, more centralized, with a greater tendency to think of a knowledge economy where knowing and doing are more and more separated from one another. In part, this is an agency problem. We have people making decisions for others who do not have the interests of those others at heart, in fact have their own interests at heart, and protect themselves at the expense of those they're supposed to be acting on behalf of. And in part, it's a question of asymmetries. There is, in these cases, much more to gain for the decision maker than to lose, but for the people affected, much more to lose than to gain. And so often the people in charge of institutions, the people in charge of government agencies, the people in charge of the government itself are making decisions that transfer risks to others. But it's not just within the government. Bankers do this. People in charge of large corporations do this. They keep the upside. The downside is transferred to other people. Think for a moment about individual virtue. What makes someone a hero? It's the willingness to sacrifice for others. It's the willingness to assume risks, the benefits of which go to other people. We don't have many heroes around anymore. Instead of having our leaders be heroes who sacrifice for our sakes, we increasingly have leaders who don't sacrifice anything, who don't assume any risk on their part. In fact, often are consistently wrong and somehow never pay any penalty for being wrong. The penalty ends up being something that is laid at our doorstep. We pay the penalty, and somehow they succeed and continue to succeed. They get all the upside, we get the downside. So when things go right, they win. When things go badly, we lose. It's a bad arrangement, a fundamentally unfair arrangement. We should beware people who are in this position to basically make decisions without any personal stake in whether those decisions are right or wrong, who bear no cost if they go wrong. So beware bureaucrats, for example. They can impose rules that are immensely costly on society with no tangible benefit. They win somehow. They are the ones who instituted this policy. They gain power, they gain influence, they can say, I'm the one who did this. The rest of us have to pay the cost. But there are lots of other people in that position as well. Beware corporate executives who can make similar decisions. Beware consultants who can come into a business and give you terrible advice, harm the business, but then are long gone, their profits taken. They don't have any skin in the game. They give you awful advice, and I've seen this happen again and again with consultants who come in, recommend reorganizations, recommend refocusing. The business suffers as a result, but the consultant gets their fee, goes on to the next target saying, hey, we consulted with this group and this group. They build up their resume, which consists mostly of failures. They consistently do harm. They get the profits. The people they consult for end up being harmed. The same thing can be true of journalists who give advice and somehow never pay the price for having called things wrong, predicted things incorrectly, or described things incorrectly. It can be true of bankers who make bets on, for example, mortgage derivatives and other things, and when things go terribly wrong, they don't suffer, they get bailed out, and they end up getting multi-million-dollar payoffs, while the decisions we're making were disastrous and the bank is destroyed. The rest of us pay the tab. In all these cases, these people have optionality at the expense of others. They have options, they can take advantage of the upside, but the downside gets transferred to the rest of us. They get to win when things work out well, the rest of us lose when they don't. In general, we could say that bureaucracy separates people from the consequences of their action. And that's true in any kind of bureaucratic structure, whether it's the bureaucratic structure of a university or a corporation or a government agency. All of those are ways of insulating people from the effects of their actions. The bureaucrat, the government official, the provost, the president, all of those people can make decisions that impose tremendous costs on the rest of us, but they never have to pay the costs themselves. In fact, it tends to be a resume builder for them. And so they benefit while the rest of us suffer. They gain more power, they gain more influence, they gain more status, while the rest of us lose. Taleb describes Fat Tony's heuristics. First of all, never get on board a plane if the pilot isn't on board, and secondly, make sure there's a co-pilot. Both of those are good advice. Never entrust yourself to somebody who has no skin in the game, who is not going to suffer if things go badly, imposing all the costs of the risk on you, benefiting from the risk themselves. Make sure they have something at stake. And secondly, the co-pilot part, make sure there are backup systems. Make sure that there is a design margin, that there's a margin for error, that there is some degree of duplication. Beware optimization. Beware efficiency experts. Beware people who want to say, well, you don't really need that, you don't really need that. Actually, you may need that. You've got to think about volatility. And it might be that the thing that when things are going well really isn't necessary becomes crucial when something happens that subjects you to stress from volatility. So don't get rid of the design margin. Don't get rid of those backup systems. Do not eliminate the co-pilot. Yeah, it's inefficient to have two people there flying the plane where one of them is really doing most of the work and the other person is really just helping. But you know what? If something goes wrong, it's really crucial to have that additional person there. And the same thing happens in all sorts of business operations. Look, wouldn't it be best to go with the lowest cost supplier, which is over there across the ocean? Well, maybe, but what if things go wrong? Go wrong politically, go wrong with weather, go wrong economically. It may be really good to have another supplier. And so don't put all your eggs in one basket. It may be more efficient in the short term to put all the eggs in one basket. It's a really bad idea in the long term. In general, the knowledge world, the information economy, has tended to separate knowing from doing, and separate talking from doing. That's a dangerous state of affairs. Those who claim to know, those who talk about it, maybe not at all the people who are actually doing anything. And it means the people who are giving you advice about investing, for example, are not the people actually doing the investing. They have nothing to lose if they're wrong. You have something to lose if they're wrong. And that's tough. Do not listen to people who have nothing at stake. If they're not going to lose if they're wrong, well, they're not going to pay much attention to whether they're right or wrong. It doesn't matter to them. They win whether you succeed or fail. So don't trust people who will put you in that position. Don't trust anybody who has no skin in the game. Now, there's several reasons why you shouldn't trust people who don't have skin in the game. One is simple, really. They don't have any incentive to take your interests into account, and so there's no particular reason why you should trust them. Taleb, in one, I think, very insightful paragraph, talks about something that is closely related to something I've discussed elsewhere. In fact, we could consider it something like an asymmetric stag hunt, if we analyze it in game theoretic terms. Remember that a stag hunt is a game that has two Nash equilibria. One where we cooperate and go after the stag, which is the best outcome for both of us, but one where we don't do that and we each go off and hunt rabbits. Well, in that case, we're less successful. A stag would be way better than a couple of rabbits, but nevertheless, it would make sense. Neither one of us can unilaterally get a better outcome as a result of changing our strategy. And so the worst case for at least one of us is where one person goes off and chasing a rabbit, leaving the other to hunt the stag unsuccessfully. Well, Taleb thinks about this in negative terms. Instead of hunting the stag, think about avoiding the bear. Okay, something that is dangerous. The best thing is for you and I to work together to try to overcome the bear, or at least successfully, jointly avoid being eaten by the bear. But if there's an asymmetry and we're differently positioned, we don't necessarily end up with that as our Nash equilibrium, or even the better Nash equilibrium. In fact, we're going to end up in a situation of mutual defection. Now, why? Well, there's an old joke that a bear comes. These two campers are there in their tent. They start hearing the bear root around. They realize they're in danger. So one of them quickly starts putting on his sneakers. And the other looks and says, I don't know if that's going to do any good. You can't outrun a bear. The guy says, I don't have to outrun the bear. I just have to outrun you. Well, that's the danger here, right? If somebody can transfer all the risk onto the other party, then the stag hunt situation becomes very different. And so what happens then? Well, what happens then is like what I'm depicting in this particular diagram. There, you see that what is best for the player who can be outrun is that we work together to defeat the bear. But the guy who's the faster runner, who can outrun his fellow and thereby avoid the bear at the cost of the other person being eaten, well, in a way, that's his first choice. He runs away and leaves the other person to be eaten. He's guaranteed to be safe under those circumstances. Now, the worst case scenario for him, of course, is if he stays and tries to defeat the bear, and the other guy runs away, well, then he's going to get eaten, or at least is likely to. But what about the case where both run? Well, he's the faster runner, and so there's some chance the other guy will get away too, but probably he's going to be eaten. So really, if we think about the slower runner, he's going to say, well, I'm better off cooperating, staying to defeat the bear, if this guy will. But on the other hand, if he's going to run, I better run too, because then I'm just likely to be eaten instead of for sure going to be eaten. And so it makes sense for him to depend on what the other person does. But the faster runner can say, well, I could cooperate and try to get both of us safe from the bear. But on the other hand, I'm guaranteed to be safe if I just take off out of here. So actually, I don't care whether he stays or whether he leaves. I'm a little better off maybe if he stays, then I'm guaranteed to get away. But look, I think I can outrun him and I'm pretty well guaranteed to get away anyway. So I've got a dominant strategy, which is defection, running away. Well, in that case, the other player better run away too. And so we get a Nash equilibrium of mutual defection. So all we have to do into a stag hunt type situation is introduce an asymmetry. Situation where, in this case, one person can run faster than the other to avoid the harm. Or if we take a more positive case related to the original stag hunt, one person is a much better hunter of rabbits than the other. All of a sudden the situation begins to change. If it's not clear whether even working together we can get the stag, but that person's a really good rabbit hunter, much better than I am, then that person does have a pretty strong incentive to go off hunting rabbits and leaving me to fruitlessly hunt the stag myself. I'm better off than hunting rabbits too, even if I'm not all that good at it. And I'm going to suffer relatively to the other person, and maybe suffer in general, because I'm not going to get very much nutrition. The point then is that asymmetry can mess up the opportunities for social cooperation here. And in fact, turn the person who tries to cooperate, tries to actually do their part and do their civic duty, into a chump. If I stay to try to defeat the bear, thinking you're going to do it too, and you run away, I end up thinking like, what a fool I've been. Okay, I feel like a chump. I feel taken advantage of. And so I might as well defect as well. Consequently, I should not only not trust the person who has no skin in the game, because they're like the person who can run away faster. I'm going to be left holding the bag. But if I realize that, then I start realizing, look, I'm a chump for even cooperating. And so you get a much more general social breakdown. If it makes no sense for me to trust a person like that, I won't. But then look what happens. If society or the corporation or the university or the institution in general is controlled by such people who have no skin in the game, I've got no reason to cooperate with them. I've got no reason to do my part. And consequently, the entire system is going to become much more fragile. Not only because the people at the top, getting no negative reinforcement from any failure, are not going to learn anything, so evolutionary change is going to be disrupted here. They're not going to learn from failures, and so the system will not get stronger as a result of stress. But it's actually going to get weaker because the stress will point out that they are getting all the gain, the rest of us are losing, we're going to feel like chumps, we're going to stop cooperating, the system becomes a lot more fragile as a result. So in short, these kinds of asymmetries, these kinds of transfers of optionality, make the entire system more fragile. They keep it from learning, they keep it from getting better, they stop it from improving, and in fact they harm it by making people entirely rationally less willing to cooperate. They make the entire structure more fragile. In the end, then Taleb concludes, ethics is largely about stolen convexities and optionality. That's precisely right. Some people end up stealing options, stealing optionality, stealing the upside from others, imposing the cost of the downside on them. They steal the convexity, they steal the optionality. They get all the advantages, somebody else has to suffer the disadvantages. It is fundamentally unfair. So he sums it up in one commandment: thou shalt not become anti-fragile at the expense of others.